Good. Welcome everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. My name is Cara Evans and I'm the head of partnerships and mergers at Eastside People. And this is my first Good Merger Index. I'm a little bit excited this morning, so bear with me. So wonderful to see so many of you here today. I'm just going to explain the plan for the session this morning and also introduce all of the faces that you can see so you know what's going on. So first of all, I just wanted to welcome our panellists this morning who have joined us. So David Holmes, who's the Chief Executive of Children England, Liz Searle, who's the Chief Executive of Keach Hospice Care, and Paul Townsley, who's the Chief Executive of Humankind. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. We really appreciate it. Also wanted to introduce the team. Which is Mike Taylor, if you want to give a wave, Mike, is the author of the report and has done an awful lot of work pulling this together and is going to present the data to us shortly. Maria Stedman, who you can't see, but who is in the background, has also contributed to the report and brought all of you here today. She is on hand if you have any technical questions. You can just message her directly in the chat and she can help out. And of course, last but not least, our Chief Executive, Richard Litchfield, who is also here today. Thank you for the wave. Richard, Mike, Richard and I are actually in the same room. So there may be some technical challenges at some point, but we may wave at each other, but just so you're aware that that's what's happening. So the session today is, as I said, Mike is going to do a brief report to tell us all about the Good Merger Index. It's our 10th year. We're very, very excited to share all of that with you today. And then we're going to introduce the panelists who are going to give a brief introduction to themselves and their story. And then we have got plenty of time for questions and answers from all of you. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you can technically do that when we get to that stage. But we just really want to have the opportunity to answer your questions and put them to the panel. We are looking to be about an hour, but we have got an hour and a half. All of our panelists can stay for an hour and a half if you can stay with us, and we've got more questions. So we may extend it that time, but we'll keep an eye on that time. We are recording today as well, as you all can see. So without further ado, I will pass to Mike to show us what was in the report.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm just going to quickly take you through the Good Merger Index. I'll start with a little bit of context, and then I'll tell you a bit about our methodology, and then I'll share some of the numbers that we've learned from 22-23. So this is the 10th year of the Good Merger Index, and I think it's worth noting that we're now looking at a year 2 years after the first year of COVID. And the other thing I think is worth bearing in mind that mergers do take a while to complete. And that means we're probably looking at mergers which are a result of conditions or decisions made in the year before or even 2 years before, in large part. Just to talk a bit about our methodology, the Charities Commission does publish a register of mergers, which we use, but of course it only includes charities, and we're quite interested in the wider social sector. It only lists mergers where a charity is fully closed and its assets have been taken on by another charity. We're reliant on when mergers are registered, and some mergers can take several years before they appear on the register. It doesn't give us any insight into what caused that merger or the nature of that merger. And it includes many, many reorganizations, for example, the merger of linked charities or the closure of a company limited by guarantee and its reopening as a charitable incorporated organization. So this is what we do. We look at the year starting May the 1st and finishing at the end of April. And the reason we do that is because most mergers are completed in April of each year. And if we used a financial year, we'd be waiting a long time before we reported on that activity. We do use the Charity Commission register, but we follow the news. We look at the websites of organisations, and we read trustee annual reports and accounts in great detail to understand the nature of each merger. We remove the tidying up of legal entities, as I mentioned earlier. We look at social enterprises as well as charities where we can. And we include a deal when we consider it to be meaningfully complete, using our own definitions of merger types. You can read more about that in the Good Merger Index. So this is what we found. We have found just 48 mergers involving 96 organisations during the year 2022 to 23. And that's the lowest level of activity that we've recorded in 10 years. And it continues a kind of a 2-year pattern now of very low activity. And again, I'll just stress that, of course, what we're looking at is probably, the result of conditions a year or 2 years ahead of that. So very much still in COVID, perhaps. Where that reduction in activity seems to be is in organisations with turnover or income of between 1 to 10 million. So we've seen a slight uptick, although I'm not sure one could say that was significant for the smaller organisations. And it's the medium to larger sized organisations where there's been a bit of a reduction, or quite a big reduction in activity. And now that's the lowest level of activity amongst those organisations we've seen over 10 years. And if we look at the types of mergers, number of takeovers, as we define them in the Good Merger Index, is not unusually low when compared to the previous 10 years, although it does sit very much where it has now for a couple of years since the peak, which was really a pre-COVID peak. The number of subsidiary model mergers has dropped quite significantly from last year, but overall, I would say it's a steady picture now for 2 years, and the overall result of that is that takeovers are now more significant than ever before. We look at how we value mergers. We look at a financial value for mergers because we think that's quite interesting insight as well. Now, we don't use assets as a way of valuing mergers because they're actually quite difficult to ascertain for smaller organisations. And we think that income is probably a clearer measure of the activity level of organisations anyway. So for a merger of equals, we combine the income of both organisations to get a value for the merger. And for takeovers and other similar types, we take the income of the organisation transferring its assets. And just to stress that we use the income from the accounts before the merger year, because the merger itself can skew the accounts of organisations quite dramatically. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we see a low level of, in terms of income transferred, a new low, and that probably reflects the reduced number of larger organisations, a low level of merger of equals, which has continued for 2 years. But it's worth bearing in mind that you'd only need to have a couple of mergers of equals between 2 large organisations, and that would have quite a significant impact on this graph. And now I'm just going to finally talk about the financial drivers for merger, because generally we think that financial stress is a driver for merger for many organisations, not all, but it's often a way of securing the work of an organisation as it finds itself in trouble. So the blue bar shows the proportion of transferring organisations in deficit, and we'd normally expect to see that over 50%. It's a little bit over 50%, but not dramatically. And the orange bar is the proportion of receiving organisations in surplus, and we'd normally expect to see that in well above 50%, which we do here. But generally, it is still a relatively healthy picture for transferring organisations. And I think it does raise a question about, the financial response to COVID may be creating quite a lot of cash in organisations generally. Now, of course, we're now in a period which is beyond that, so it'll be interesting to see whether this particular graph changes in the next year or two. So just to summarise, the lowest level of activity in 10 years, and that's really a 2-year trend now. The lowest level of activity amongst medium to large-sized organisations that we've ever seen. Takeovers at a higher proportion than ever. And a reminder that these mergers are probably a result of conditions in 2020 to 2022, and perhaps a reflection of the impact of COVID on organisations. So, of course, there's been many more challenges since, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to leave you and the panelists to discuss why all of this might be and what might happen next. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you so much for all your efforts in putting that report together. As you said in the methodology, it's not easy to gather that data, and it's just really appreciate everything you've done and your presentation. Thank you. It is interesting looking at those numbers that obviously this is the lowest ever, and I can see some people have commented on that. And I think it is interesting, obviously, as Mike said, this was 18 months ago, and we know things have changed significantly. And at Eastside People, we know that in the last year we've seen a 70% increase in inquiries and a 30% increase in merger related projects. So we believe that coming down the line things are going to be quite different. But really one of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion today is about how merger can be an option and how collaboration in these challenging times can really help us. What I would like to do now is let our panelists introduce themselves, and then please do put those questions in the Q&A. That would be great. So if I go to our panelists to say who you are, where you're from, but also where you are on your merger journey, and when I say the word merger to you, what comes to mind? And I'd like all of the participants to answer that question in the chat as well. So question again is, if I say merger to you, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Mike is going to pull together a word cloud to give us an idea of what's all sort of in our, straight in there, Colin, thank you very much, what we're already thinking about. So if I go to our panelists, Liz, if you can introduce yourself first, then Paul, and then David. Thank you very much.
Morning, everybody. My name's Liz Searle and I'm the Chief Exec at Keach Hospice Care. I've been the Chief Exec there for about 8 years now, and partnership working was always on our radar, part of our sort of strategy. And we merged with a smaller hospice, Bedford Daycare Hospice, last year. We started in January, finished about June. It was a bit of a record time, and we're now about 6 months into our transition plan. So yeah, I'm delighted to share our story. Oh, my word, Cara. Do you still want my
well done.
Sorry. I was trying to think of a good word, but I would say not perfect would be my word. Not perfect.
I'll take it. It's all good. Okay, thank you. I'll pass to Paul.
Hi there, morning everybody. Nice to be on the call. My name's Paul Townsley. I'm the CEO of Humankind charity, and also a new word for me in recent times, CEO designate of the new merged company, which we're working on a merger with Richmond Fellowship, which people might have seen the announcement, but we'll be aiming to merge fully by October 24. So we've done at Humankind number of mergers. So I think this is this will be the 5th one. This is very much a merger of equals, and we started the journey about 2 years ago. So we're 2 years into the journey now. So as you can see, we've been on a long and winding road. I've worked at Humankind for about 9 years, and the first word that sprang to mind, and it's just come on the chat, is opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So David?
Hi, everyone. I'm David Holmes, Chief Executive of Family Action. Really good to join you all this morning. I guess I have a couple of things to offer. Within Family Action, we've done 8 mergers with other organisations over the last 10 years that I've been the Chief Exec. But I also had the experience last year of closing a charity that I was the chair of. So I'm happy to talk about both experiences, and in the case of Children England, the different options for the future that we thought about as a board, including the possibility of merger and why we didn't go ahead with that. And the word for me in relation to mergers, I would say, is opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I would just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for putting in your words in the chat. I'm going to give Mike a second to pull that all together because it's going to take a while. But I also just thought I've only just seen one question in the Q&A, and I know you're going to have more than that. So don't be shy. If you have any questions for the panel, please. Oh, another one went in. Thank you very much. Please do drop them in. But actually, I would just go back to David, to what you were just saying quickly about Children England. If you could talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure the attendees would like to know. If you're able to share, that's amazing.
Sure. Would you like me to do that now? Okay. So I think the important thing to say about Children England is that its funding base had changed dramatically. So more than 10 years ago, it was the recipient of a very large government contract for infrastructure support to the children's voluntary sector, and that government contract had gone, and so it had moved to a model where the vast majority of its income, more than 80%, was fundraised income, and it was fundraised income for infrastructure support, which is a more challenging ask than fundraising for direct service provision. And we had, over the last 10 years, had considerable success in attracting fundraised income, but it had always been a struggle, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to raise the income that was needed to support a campaigning function. And gradually that had resulted in the charity using up the available reserves it had. And so the financial cushion for continuing became more and more challenging. And it got to a point where the sort of future of the charity was depending on the success of the next fundraising bid. And when you get to that point, and the board had been thinking about this for some time, you then have to really seriously start considering what the other options are. And so we'd thought quite hard about merger, we'd thought about a very managed closure process, which would secure the legacy. And we'd thought obviously about income diversification and whether there were any other routes to bring in more income. In the end, it came down to quite a stark choice. And the best choice for the charity was to manage a really sensible closure process, whereby some of the charity's work was funded and could continue. So it was a case of trooping those staff over in good time, in a really carefully managed way. And in the end, we only made 2 staff redundant. And they were the staff who were focusing on the campaigning side of the charity's work. But because we managed the closure process really well, we were able to record a series of podcasts which captured the learning of the charity. We were able to secure the charity's archive. We're preparing a book bringing together key writings of the charity, called Thought Leadership, and that will be published soon. So it was a very managed process. the merger option was unattractive because essentially we would be asking another charity to take on exactly the same challenge that we had been facing, which was to try and find fundraised income to secure work, which after 10 years of trying, we just couldn't do anymore. So on balance, the board felt that the best way of securing the legacy was to close well rather than get to a point where the charity collapsed. So that was our thought process.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, David. I imagine that was very, very difficult, but wonderful that you were able to close so well. We've got lots of questions coming up. I'm just looking at Mike to see if we're ready for a word cloud. I got a thumbs up. So I will come to those questions. Just a very quick one while Mike's just pulling that last bit. David, there was one, you talked about 8 mergers. And it's just a quick question about whether they were mergers or takeovers.
Okay, so they were all what I would call full acquisitions. So bringing all of the business of another charity within the umbrella of Family Action. I guess in some ways we're an unusual charity in as much as we're very broadly based. We go across the lifespan, so we work with children, families, adults over a wide range of services: family support, mental health, special educational needs and disability, young carers, etc. So it's a very broad charity. The model that we've found that really works for us, though, is to bring another charity absolutely within under our umbrella, so they don't have separate governance or a separate board. They're very much part of Family Action, but retaining their logo, their brand, their service models, their budget. And that has worked really well.
Great, that's brilliant. I'm just gonna thank you so much for answering that question. Could I just look to Mike for, are we ready for a word cloud? Oh, look at that, all fancy, it's working. Excellent. Okay, I've got to move you so I can see. Oh, look at that. Excellent. I like the opportunities big. That's good. Complicated. Well, I don't think we can disagree with that. I was just going to say to our panelists, is that what you were expecting? Liz, any thoughts or comments on that?
Yes, I think what I was expecting to see, I think opportunity particularly, I think that was one of the things that featured very highly in our merger. And complicated, yes. Technical is a word I've used a lot recently about our merger. It was a mixture of the art and the science, I think, really. The passion and the heart, but a very much a technical exercise. So complicated is certainly true.
Definitely. Paul, is that what you were expecting? Any comments on that?
Well, I think I was more expecting a traditional cloud.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
With lots of different words, but obviously I think but yeah, I think what you've potentially got is the kind of bigger word being sort of positive, but I guess within that and reflective maybe of people attending, there's sort of what you might call more downsides to it, which might reflect why charities and people don't necessarily embark on a path towards merger, and would be useful to talk about, I guess. So yeah, I mean they're all things that you would recognise as well. Yeah.
Definitely. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to say that I think opportunity is absolutely there for the charities that have merged into Family Action. There have been benefits both ways. We have really benefited from the additional expertise they bring, and also the opportunity to have more income to contribute to a stronger back office that then helps everybody. So I think if people can get over the anxiety of merger and deal with the complexity, then there is opportunity to be embraced.
That was beautifully expressed. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Excellent. Okay, so just to remind everyone, if you've got any questions, drop them in the Q&A. If you want to direct them to a particular person, please do say in that. If there is an anonymous function as well, if you don't want to reveal who you are, but please do add any of those questions in. I'm going to go first of all to Warren's question, which I'm going to ask all three of the panelists, which is, what are the top 3 issues that you need to consider to ensure the opportunity becomes a success? So I think if I go to Paul first, then Liz, then David.
Top 3 issues to consider. I'll sort of jump in. I was hoping to have come second, so I'd have a bit more time to put my top 3 issues. But I'll go in and then people can add to my stuff. Top 3 issues to consider to merger is, I guess one of the things is obviously critically is the relationships and the relationship management. And within that, you're making sure there is a sort of compatible fit in terms of how people see the potential and the opportunity. So obviously that's a critical success factor. And if you feel that that isn't there, then you need to fairly quickly walk away from the opportunity. The second one is the business case and the sort of why are you doing it for, what's the benefit to the people you're working with, and your strategy and mission and purpose. And then your third area is connected to that really, which is your due diligence on whether there are any reasons not to progress, but also checking whether there is that clear fit. And then you have obviously a real process of taking people with you on the journey on that process. So I think I've answered the question, the 3 issues.
Yeah, you have. Amazing. Perfect.
Thank you.
Liz, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Paul. I think, a lot of what he said is absolutely right. I think for me, there was a challenge around making sure we took the board with us, both boards initially, and the Keach board longer term, because obviously they were taking on the liabilities and undertakings of the other charities. So I think making sure the board had every opportunity to be briefed, making sure that the board had access to their legal advice that they could ask independently, not just our reports, but actually they had direct opportunity to talk to our legal advisors, things like that, I think. And linked to that, mergers are sort of risk-based activity really, and I think making sure that those risks are clear and open as best that can be, which kind of leads me on to the point I made earlier, which was due diligence is never going to be perfect. And I think there is a weighing up of balance between across that really. I think we started off naively thinking we'd have 100% of all the information we needed to make the decision. That was our naivety in the beginning. And I think we quickly realised that that wouldn't be the case. And where we had things that weren't as robust as we would like, we had to make a risk-based approach to that. And where we did have information, often we redid it anyway, because you just want to start in a very good place, I think. Then lastly, issues was just to be really clear why you're doing it. And, we had the support of Eastside, which was great. And we developed a reasons to believe document. And I think that really helped us, because at every meeting, every steering group, we kept coming back to say, why do we believe this is a good idea? And are we still on that journey? And yeah, I think having that with us on that journey, and we still go back to it now in our transition to look to see, how close are we to our original vision for this? And that was really helpful.
Good. Thank you so much. David, anything to add?
I think it's harder to go third.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So I agree with everything that's been said, but I'm going to answer the question in a slightly different way, which again just reflects the experience of, I guess, having done 8 mergers. So I'm going to talk more about, I guess, the psychology of merger. So for me, the 3 big issues that I've learned, first one I call psychological readiness. So both sides, both parties have to be ready for and positively want it, and understand that this is a process of give and take. If you want the merger just for what you can get, it's not going to work, because if you're the party being acquired, to use that language, then there are things that you inevitably are going to have to give up that will need to change. If you're the party that's acquiring, then there has to be so much respect for the entity that you're acquiring and how they work, and you know, it can't just be a takeover. So are you both ready for what this will involve? Second thing for me is energy. A chair, a chief exec can kill a merger themselves. So if that energy isn't there to really push through and achieve it, then it will end almost before it's begun.
Yeah.
So that energy has to be there, and it has to be continuous, because there is a lot to work out. And also just being really mindful of organizational culture, because organizations are different, and it can take, you know, a matter of a few years for two different organizations really to come together and start operating as one. And you have to be really mindful about those culture issues, really respectful of them, but also recognize that sometimes cultures need to change if you're bringing organizations together. So they're just different aspects of merger that I think we talk about less, because we often talk about the complexity, the legal technicalities, the money, but not really the psychological processes that are involved as well.
Thank you. I think the next question I want to go to sort of links to that, really, which is about how to make sure that existing funders and service unions retain confidence in the merger. So yeah, existing and new funders as well. Rather than point to anyone, would anyone like to answer that question before I pass that on? If one of you don't choose, I will ask.
Well, just a really practical thing to say is that often funders throw barriers in the way, because, for example, you may have an entity that's already receiving funding from a funder, and then a new funder won't fund the same organization twice. An existing funder won't fund the same organization twice, or it may be that the funder will only fund organizations with a turnover below a certain level, and if you merge and your turnover gets bigger, then that then becomes an issue. So there is much you can do to assure funders that the coming together of two organizations is actually going to create one stronger organization, and lots of funders really recognize that. But funders themselves need to be careful that their own rules don't then become impediments to charities being able to merge and have the benefits of merger.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Paul.
Yeah, I think I suppose one of the things with such big piece of work across the different experience of had mergers is that you obviously can't anticipate the impact and consequences of taking such a bold move often in terms of the people you're working with, and I suppose it's sort of goes without saying that you can't, as you're in sensitive discussions and confidential discussions, go around a series of people and ask them their thoughts on it and how they'd react. So I guess within that you do have to plan your communications well with funders and stakeholders, and also I guess one of the sort of tips is make sure you have the right people at the right times, giving the right messages. But obviously there are unintended consequences that you can't anticipate. So I guess part of that is also at the outset deciding that the journey you're going on is worth the risk and the process. Because obviously if you've got a funder or a critical contract that you would potentially lose because of it, then you'd need to have done that in your sort of early planning. So is the strategic benefit greater than those risks? And then the other bit is it's just working well and clearly communicating why you're doing what you're doing, and thinking those things through in terms of the kind of structures and what you're doing next. But there is definitely a fallout often with stakeholders generally, you do have to work really hard, and you can't always anticipate and think about where that might happen.
Brilliant. Thank you. Liz, I have actually got another question for you, unless you wanted to add to that. Would you like the other one, or did you want to add anything?
Oh, I don't mind. Which is the easiest?
I think the one I'm about to give you is a little bit easier.
Funny.
So it's just a specific one about where you talked about legal advice. What kind of legal advice was that? And could you what would you recommend in terms of legal advice that is needed going through this process?
Yes, okay. So, and I might come back to them, but for us then, we contracted with a legal company, VWV for us. They're a company that we already work with, and we asked them to do all the legal process for us. We thought it was really important to have our own independent legal advice, and actually the other charity, Bedford Daycare, had their own independent legal advice and took their own company advice, which I think is really important for both boards to have that independence actually in that. That worked very well. I think they opened up a number of data rooms for us, which meant that the due diligence documents could start to land into folders that we could start looking at. I did in the beginning keep the merger activity to a very small number of senior people, not in terms of communicating, but in terms of actual activity, because it's a very time-consuming job, and I wanted to sort of make sure we got the focus there and we weren't distracting from the day job. So and that meant that those people could go into the folders, look at that sort of due diligence work, ask questions of our legal team. But also, as I mentioned earlier, and I think this was some advice that we had, which worked really well, was just before we had the final meeting where we got to the sort of final agreement, voting for the merger. We did have a meeting with our legal team, which, although all the briefing papers had gone out, it gave the board and trustees their own chance to ask their own questions for their own, their own assurance, and that worked brilliantly. It was really good to have done that, and I would recommend that. So yes, but I think at one point we were about 76% roughly of all the evidence we needed for our due diligence, and I was in a mass panic at that point, because I thought that's nowhere near enough. We haven't got enough of all the things we need, and actually the legal team were able to say to us, actually, that's not bad, you're getting there. So it was that kind of stuff that I think is really helpful. Can I just say something about funders, if I can come back to that?
Absolutely.
If I've answered.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
So hospices, like many charities, are held very close to people's hearts, and we had people, the sort of great and the good of the town of Bedford, who had supported Bedford Daycare for 30+ years. Some were still founders who were still involved, and so we trod extremely carefully. We didn't use the word takeover, and I saw that was in one of the questions. Do we miss that word? And we purposefully didn't use that word, although effectively that's what we were doing. And we tried very hard to present it as a coming together of two wonderful historic organisations, shared values, shared purpose, and that for Bedford Daycare, they just couldn't grow in the way they'd like to, because finances were limiting that capacity. And this was an opportunity to increase services to the public and to the community. And we worked really hard on that, and we communicated out early to the great and the good to make sure they were on the journey with us and to get early views from them about that. Because actually it's a reputational risk to your own charity when you start talking merger, because if anything doesn't happen, suddenly it's, well, what's the matter with you then? Why didn't it come off? What did you do? Was there something in you that stopped this? So I think it's obviously a big reputational thing. So we did that, and I think that worked relatively well. We were very conscious that for some people this was their baby of 30 years, that we were, we worked hard with the language about, growth and opportunity and respect and values and things like that. So that all went, I think, fairly well. The only thing that happened at the end, which I've talked about, I think, before, was when we did the press releases for this. So we went out to our local press, and there was some national press that went out, which was lovely. We went out with this very carefully crafted, bringing together two wonderful charities. And then when the press went out, it was, you know, big charity stop small charity falling over, you know, job saved, you know, this kind of language. And I just wanted to put my head on the desk, because we'd worked so hard at keeping this sort of respectful language, this values driven, you know, merger, and then the headlines go, you know, big charity takes over little one, and you think, oh no. But you know, you can't control everything, and I think by then people had understood the purpose. What's been really nice, and we may come on later to this, but what's been really nice for me is, you know, now we're sort of 6-7 months in, we've had as many referrals, service user referrals in the last 3 months as they had in the previous year in the former charity. And to be able to say that to people is incredible, because they can see that already in these early days it is working, and we are able to see more people. So it's that wins the day, I think, when they start to see the successes of what you promised. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Liz, because that just makes me so happy. And I think it's really good to know that all that hard work at the end of the day, that's the result you've got, which is brilliant. Okay, I'm going to keep going with the questions. So I've got one from about the board, which I think, again, if you're all comfortable to answer, is really about top tips about how to keep the board well briefed, and what did this look like in your experience? So Paul, are you up for this one first this time, and then David?
Yeah. So I'll keep it brief on the board brief, so we don't duplicate and do that. I suppose one of the things with boards and the process is a kind of horses for courses approach to the different mergers you're doing and the different characters involved, and I guess psychology is involved in this. So it's critically important, I think, that there is some independence of view and facilitation in the process, and somebody who helps steer you through that. And sometimes that can be quite small scale if you're doing a small merger, as we've done in the past, and then recently with the merger we've been working on, it's been working with Eastside. So I think there's somebody that both parties trust in terms of engagement with boards, and facilitation is probably critically important within this, and can help also pick up some of the things that might not be getting spoken about to clear through some of what we talked about before. I think regular meetings, regular briefings, and obviously there needs to be a separation, particularly throughout the whole process, really, of the boards being able to make sure that what they're doing is kind of independently in the best interests of the people they're working for and the staff. So that's another key element. And then obviously the critical relationships are with the chairs and the CEOs often, and also, but it's also critically important for the board to feel fully involved in it, and also sometimes reacting to where boards don't feel comfortable, and trying to work through that as well, because there are hiccups on the way for different parties, I think, and because obviously sometimes if you've got smaller subgroups or you're working with chairs, boards may feel excluded from that. So it's critically important that there's a lot of sharing of information.
Brilliant, excellent. David or Liz, do you have anything to add to that? David?
Yeah, a few thoughts from me about things I've learned during the course of doing quite a few mergers. I think it's really important to keep your board informed about potential mergers from the earliest opportunity, really. So at the point where you've maybe had an initial conversation with another chief exec about the potential for the board, you know, in my CEO report, I would mention that to the board, just to say that it had happened in my regular one-to-ones with my chair. I would mention it, but I wouldn't over-egg it. So I'd say, you know, it's a conversation. Let's see where this might go. I've learned that it's important to have a subcommittee of trustees whose job is to review potential mergers. And I think the benefit of that is you avoid getting to the big set piece discussions at the board, which then sort of almost are too big for a single board meeting to handle. And so the board then has the confidence that a subgroup of 3 or 4 trustees has had a really good look at this with the executive. And so by the time it's coming to the board for more decision or for an approval in principle, it's, you know, it's really been scrutinized by a subgroup on the board already. And also something for me of your board as well, and it goes to what I was saying about culture before. Somehow you need to ensure that your board can recognize opportunity too, and so isn't too risk averse to not be able to seize the opportunity that a merger might offer. Equally, you don't want your board to be so gung-ho that it's going to agree to anything. So it's why the process has to be really rigorous, but you need to be able to have a really full and frank discussion of the scale of the opportunity here and whether it's right for the charity.
Excellent, thank you. Liz, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I mean, I agree with those points. We had a sort of joint, you'd probably call it a steering group, I guess, for the merger, which involved some of my trustees and also trustees for the other charity. We came together regularly to talk through the process. That worked really well. I think what it did allow was trustees from Bedford Daycare to ask questions in that meeting that they were really bothering them. And I think that was right. And sometimes it was things that you're trying to get all the big due diligence things done, and then a question comes like, what are people going to say when they pick up the phone? You know, you're kind of thrown a little bit. But actually, some of those things are really important, and I think they've come from a good place. And sometimes you need to address some of the smaller things, even if you can't say exactly. You could say, well, we could start with this, and then we'll consider it. It sort of stops the blocking of the thinking of the journey if you can get some of the smaller things out the way. I've often thought, would I do it again? And I absolutely would. But I am very conscious that I have a board that you know sits very neatly in what the other speakers have said. You know, that is open to the risk, but is not sort of gun-ho sort of thing. If I was in a different organisation with a different board, I'd need to be fairly confident about their appetite for risk, because you can get a long way down a journey and people get cold feet, and that's really difficult. So I think that would be a discussion to have with the board before you even start, really, and just do a bit of an assessment of that appetite for risk.
Yeah,
no, that pick up a couple of more bits that bring through, connect to what other colleagues said. I think one of the things is to have a sort of agreed strategy on mergers with your board as well, that you can refer back to. And for both Richmond Fellowship and ourselves, we were working within our strategy. And so that was critically important, and so we could, and I think also I'd encourage people to look at mergers, because it is in the best interest of the people we're working with, despite the words on the word cloud, when you sort of cut the crap out of it. And often we're actually putting the needs of other things perhaps in front of the people we're working with. So I think that's why it's quite important to have a bit of a strategy as well.
Thank you. Brilliantly on message there. Thank you very much. Completely agree with what you just said. We're going to keep going. I've got a few more questions. So the next one is really about the journey for staff. So what tips do you have to make the merger feel positive and exciting, and an opportunity for staff who this could be quite a worrying time for them? I don't know who to ask first, so I'm going to go with David because he looks like he's ready to go, but that's just a guess. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. For me, the key word that you said there that I really want to emphasize is exciting, because if this is a merger between two organizations that can really benefit from one another's expertise and experience and reputation and everything, then it can be a massively exciting coming together of expertise, and that's how you maximize the opportunity. I think so keeping that excitement alive. And I think it was Liz who was talking about, the going back to sort of really reminding yourself about why you're doing this anyway. It's really, really important, because if you've got that straight, if there are advantages on both sides, then you have to keep that excitement alive, because that allows you to get through all of the complexity and the due diligence and everything. So that's one big thing. I think the other thing to emphasize, though, is that this is a complicated process, and you want to make sure that it is going ahead, or is likely to go ahead, before you start communicating openly about it. So it's using some discretion to keep those discussions within a small group of people who can work through the detail until the point where you really think this is going to go ahead. And then when you communicate it to staff, you need to be communicating it really fully and really transparently and personally, so that people have a chance to really understand why you're doing it, what it will mean for them, and you're able to provide answers. So communicating too early or in a drip way is really unhelpful. But just thinking about the right point to start talking is vital. And when you start talking, you need to have the answers to the questions that people are bound to ask.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I can see Paul and Liz nodding, but I'm just looking to see if either of them want to add anything to that. Liz?
Yes, I'd add a bit to that. I mean, we had a really well-crafted communication plan, you know, like you do, of all the things you're going to say and when you're going to say it and to who you're going to say it, etc. But of course, things end up not going quite as you always think. I absolutely agree that being open and transparent, you know, as soon as you can is the right thing. We did set up a dedicated email account. I'm sure others have done that, where people could, you know, staff could put in their questions. And then we developed an FAQ on the back of that, and we kept updating it as we went, because that was really helpful. People could just go and have a look and see what, as we updated it. Sometimes we had to say we're not sure how that will be yet, but as soon as we can, we'll let you know. I think the thing we haven't mentioned, which I think features in many of the questions, is actually volunteers. I think one of the challenges for us was communicating. We have large numbers of volunteers in the hospice world, and I'm sure it's true for many charities. And actually, the decision of how to communicate with volunteers was actually for me a little bit more tricky, really, because you're not seeing them so regularly. They're not maybe necessarily as understanding of what you're trying to do and why. Shop volunteers are very passionate about their shops, for example, and we were going to take over 5 charity shops as part of the merger, and up until that point there'd been probably the natural kind of slight sort of competition that there is around charity shops and different, you know, so there's all of that sort of starts to play out. And we were sort of forced to communicate earlier than we'd hoped to, because a breach had happened, a sort of confidentiality breach had happened through a group of volunteers into one of the shops. And that caused us some real headaches, and I didn't want it to get to staff before, you know, I didn't want them hearing it sort of third hand. So we ended up communicating a little earlier in the journey than we would have wanted to, but actually I don't regret that now. I think it was a helpful thing. It generated a few questions to the inbox, but people felt they could, you know, I mean, a common question was, will I now have to work on a different site? You know, these are things that bother people, aren't they? And you know, we were able to answer those things saying, you know, no, but you know, there will be opportunities and you might like to do something different, and it'll give you a chance for development and all of the usual things that you would say. But I just think about communicating with volunteers as well as staff, because they can trip you up if we haven't got them on board early enough.
Excellent, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think for staff, I suppose I'd sort of take an intake of breath, because it's obviously a massive issue in a service delivery organisation, because I think the sort of combined total staff will be touching on 3,000, and that will mean TUPE for about 1,000 individuals. So it's a big, not an inconsiderable task ahead, and I guess it is connecting to the excitement, the communication, providing assurance to people and clear messages. But I guess whatever size you're doing, it's about being clear, what people value, and people value honesty. and don't say things that aren't going to be true or happen, is one of the things. So, for example, if you say that services won't be disrupted, and then people haven't got IT for a week, they'll say you said services weren't going to be disrupted. So you have to be really think through those clear messages. But I think ultimately the excitement comes from potential improvements to service delivery and the impact on the services you're offering. And if you've got a clear, compelling business case for the merger, then you've got something to work on in terms of the people you're working with, in terms of staff. Obviously, you need to follow really good processes and communication and structures with all staff. And I guess one of the things we've done within this one, within the merger of equals, is to go on a new journey together, where we are potentially rebranding, renaming the organisation, and making everyone feel part of that journey, regardless of where you sit within the organisation. And obviously, pragmatically, it's about taking the knowledge with you as well. So obviously, it's more challenging if you've got financial pressures leading to mergers. But one of the things I'd be looking at is, have you got resources to invest in that transition with staff as well?
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have got some more questions. So we're going to stay for a little bit longer because I'm trying to get through all of them if I can. So I will just move swiftly on to the next one. Somebody's given me my final question, which is great. So thank you very much. I'll come to that one in a little while. But I think I'm going to go to the question. This is actually for David directly. It's just, there's a couple of questions for you around the fact, you've done a lot of mergers in a lot of time. So first of all, it's about, does it get any easier as you do this each time? I don't know if it's possible to answer that question.
It gets easier in as much as you know what to do. I think it gets easier as well in that you know the questions to ask at the very beginning, and I go back to that point I was making about psychological readiness, or however you want to describe it. But those conversations about, are you really serious? Is the will and the energy here to do this? Does that exist? And you can spot after a while whether that energy is there and the willingness to do everything that's required. Otherwise, you're going to spend a year talking and nothing will happen. So I think it gets easier to know what is real and what is less real. Mm-hmm. And often you see that because people are talking about partnership and avoiding the sort of merger discussion, and so that you're just starting from very different places. It gets easier because you understand the different steps that are involved. You understand how to do due diligence. Something Paul said really resonated with me, which is having a merger strategy. So we do as well. So we're really clear about what we're looking for in terms of potential mergers. So it's experience that is complementary to ours or that reinforces an expertise that we already have. Often we're looking in specific geographical areas for partners. Often we're looking for organizations of a particular size. And we are very, I suppose, careful to look at organizations that have income streams that aren't solely dependent on fundraised income. So where there are sources of contractual income that we can build on. Often what we're really good at is, because we've got a really strong back office, is enabling organizations to build their contractual income to help them to bid for new work. And so we can use, I guess, our greater organizational clout to actually help an organization to develop where it's got a brilliant service model, for example, but maybe has invested hugely into its frontline, but but had a corresponding reduction in investment into its back office.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to ask you one more question, David, just
Yeah.
around the all of those mergers. Was it about two or more people, or was it lots of people that were involved, or was it can't go through all of them, but just roughly?
So organizations of different sizes, a really critical thing that I've learned is if you're merging with a smaller organization, you've got to be really careful that you're not putting huge amounts of extra work and responsibility on just one person in that organization, where you've got, you know, an array of people your side who are asking for different bits of due diligence. So it's being really realistic about how to manage that due diligence process so it's manageable on the other side as well as your own. So there's something about that. Also, as to what I was saying before, a lot of the mergers that we've done have been where organizations have proactively come to us because they know we've done a lot of mergers. They have wanted to build their service base, but are struggling because they don't have the back office to support that. And so are recognizing that a collaboration, a partnership, a merger with a bigger organization will actually be good for their beneficiaries and will enable them to do more of the work that they know is impactful. So that leads to really productive conversations.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, I've got two more questions, and then we want to have plenty of time to wrap up and everything in case there's anything else you want to add. So this is to all of you. As a charity, what signals should you be looking for in regard when it is the best time to merge? That one thinking, and David, if you're ready, you look like you're ready.
Yeah, can I just start with that, because something I didn't believe or that didn't sit well with me was something that was said right at the beginning by Mike, that organizations have, and I'm paraphrasing you unfairly, but less financial distress at the moment. I don't think that's true. So it might have been true for a moment during COVID, but I think charities, in my experience, and I know there's 160,000 of them, I think so many charities have just got their head down and are in survival mode at the moment, and we're all just doing our best to keep things going, and there isn't the headspace, I think, for an awful lot of charities to actually just look ahead and think, could this be easier if we were doing it with somebody else? And so and what I've learned as well is that it's imperative to create the headspace to think about that before you get into financial crisis, because then it all just gets very, very messy. So I think somehow we need to change the culture so that we are just looking ahead and seeing merger as potentially something very positive. But then that comes down to the drive and the decision-making power in authorities to actually help those conversations happen. And it's where chief execs and chairs have an awful lot of power. And it's about encouraging people to have those conversations when it may impact on their individual roles. But if your focus is on what your charity does and your beneficiaries, then you need to be looking ahead and recognizing this doesn't have to be, a negative thing. It can be incredibly positive as well.
100%, absolutely. Listen, Paul, would either of you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just talking from our experience, I mean, we didn't start off, although we have merger in our strategy, that's not where we started actually in this particular case. We really started with working together and trying to help the other charity build their capabilities by being neighbourly, I guess, in a way, and all having a similar purpose. So we sort of started with that. And I think there were two areas that they were really struggling with. One was one was with registration with the Care Quality Commission. So this is obviously specifically a health issue, but it meant that they couldn't really grow the services without the registration, and they couldn't get the registration without doing the service. Yeah, they got in that sort of chicken and egg thing. And we tried to see whether we could extend our registration across. So we looked at all the different ways we could do that. But it ended up being difficult to do that. And the other was about accessing the electronic patient record system, which without now you feel like you're an outsider to the system. And the investment in that for them was huge. I mean, just huge, tens of thousands of pounds outside the, you know, the need to do that. So we had that issue as well. You know, it got to a point where I went and spoke to their board and said, look, I think you've got, this is how I see it. You know, you can stay small and beautiful and just do what you're doing now. Nothing wrong with that. But, you know, your ambition to grow and do more things is definitely curtailed. Or you can come with us, you know, and that was really the conversation, a very light, but, you know, well-meaning conversation where it all sort of evolved from. So I think it was part of a journey from how do we assist to how do we support to the next step, which was to come in with us. I would just like to say one quick thing on this, though, because I think we missed something here, which is if you've got a smaller charity that's busy trying to raise money but can't grow its services, there is a reputation risk to them and the sector, because, you know, you're raising money, you're promoting being something, which actually in effect you're either not or reducing amounts of that thing. So I think there is something really important about a sector-wide thought about this, that actually having a failing charity or something that's kind of becomes a reputation risk in your patch is something worth thinking about, because when a charity goes down or goes down badly, everybody in that area and broader is affected. So there's just something to mention about that, really. And I think for us, that was one of the sort of background drivers, that actually we don't want this to fail, because it will stop seeing users, but also it'll have a reputation risk for charities broadly and for hospices specifically.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. Paul?
Yeah, I think the looking at signals element, I suppose my thoughts on that was, I think within this, I'm not sure you're doing it based on signals particularly. But having said that, then I thought, well, maybe you are. So I was arguing with myself there. I think our first sort of mergers were based on basically market signals around and funding issues that smaller organisations were struggling to compete and be able to resource their organisations to compete, and the resources were not there to pay for those organisations to be able to deliver the sort of services they wanted to. So the early mergers for us were around the being in control of your own destiny. And then the second, the merger of equals we're embarking on at the moment then is really about how can we have a greater impact, and how can we deliver the type of services we really want to, and have more sustainable funding and be more resilient and be able to innovate. So I think it's really about, there are some market signals. I mean, having said that, I think that most of the mergers we've done have been opportunistic. So they are kind of working on signals, but then some have been proactive. So I hope that's been helpful.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, my final question to all of you is, what are your merger predictions for 23-24? What's to go? Up, lower, higher?
I think if we're on prices right, I think based on, I mean, one of the things that's sort of a bit crazy is how at one time everything will be done in person, face to face, connecting. I suppose one of the things to sort of react is that a lot of this is done without actually physically meeting people for long periods of time, which does feel quite strange. So I think just when we talk about relationship building, I think things will get higher, because I think what you're probably reflecting is the conditions of COVID and COVID slump and people battening down the hatches. So I think it will get higher. I think that there are clearly blockages to why people see the sort of strategic benefit of mergers, and I think so that will potentially restrict numbers increasing much higher, but higher from me.
Excellent, thank you. Liz, David, either Liz?
Yes, I would agree. I think it, just knowing, what I know around the sort of hospice world, I think it will increase. I think it makes it even more important to be clear about the purpose and the values and what's trying to be delivered. I think that's really important. But actually, if by coming together we can provide more services to more people in a more cost-effective way, then it's a must, I think, for me.
Yep. David.
And I would say that it will increase, but let's be honest, it's going to increase from an incredibly low base when you look at the number of charities that there are in the UK. I think it would only increase very significantly if we create the headspace for chief execs and boards to be looking ahead and thinking very clearly and honestly about survival prospects, financial prospects, and whether they could achieve their charity's mission better with another organization. And I think that involves a sea change in how we are governing our charities. So that's very different.
Definitely food for thought, absolutely. Thank you so much. I also concur on that. I do definitely believe we're going to see more. At the end of the day, we talked about it today, there's some real positivity in our discussion, and I just want you all to go away with the thought it's an option. And if you want to talk to anyone about it, you can come talk to me. Obviously, I need to say that. The next round table for Eastside People is on the 20th of March. Please look out for that in your emails and social media. We are here if you need your help for a confidential chat at any time. I'm going to pass to Richard to just close up the entire session. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks all, and I get the chance to say a few closing remarks to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to our great speakers, Liz, Paul, David. Thank you so much on everyone's behalf for sharing your insights and doing so openly. You've been a brilliant audience as well. The chat and the Q&A has been buzzing for the last hour and a quarter. So thank you very much for coming. As Cara says, if you'd like to speak about any particular merger situation confidentially with us, then you know where to come, and I'm sure Cara will be only too delighted to have that conversation. I just wanted to finish with one other comment, really, which is just to underline that beyond our consultancy and recruitment services, we aim to create spaces for social sector leaders, like we've done today for people like yourselves, so that we can hear stories from peers, we can share those stories, we can learn together and connect. I think our job is to provide kind of resources and insights and ideas so that it can help you in getting the job done and building the great organizations that you run for the future. So please do think of us as part of your valued professional network. And I just wanted to add one other initiative, or tell you about one other initiative coming down the line, which is that we're as part of that wider work, we're developing a charity reporting tool to help organizations report on their ESG performance, a way really to demonstrate a commitment to good governance and greater effectiveness. We're aiming to launch that in the summer, and we'd love to have an early adopters group. So if that's something that feels that you'd be interested in, or that maybe you're already looking at with your charity, if you'd like to help us in that early adopters group to design it and do some testing with it. We'd love to have you involved. The aim is very much that it's made by the charity sector rather than imposed by regulators. So yeah, please just perhaps just drop your name into the chat if you'd like to be involved in that, or contact me separately. And that just leaves me to say many thanks and hope everyone has a great day.